Okay. So I'm not going to be continuing this station either, it looks like. I might leave it up for a little while. Neither is there an interest or an algorithm. And in order to survive, we have to behave like an AI. Like this AI generated recruiter just sent me this letter that I took a picture of. And I thought, wow, that's really good. That must be written by AI. I looked down, looks like a real woman. But then it's a perfect rendition. And see, AI does everything to manipulate the human form. But there's a rock, paper, scissors game on bottom. And I knew exactly the way I won, like, and drew. I drew like 6 or 7 times with the AI. I think 6 times, and I won twice. And I knew once I pulled up the scissors, the AI wouldn't take the risk. But I did scissors anyway on the 9th one, and I lost. But it was just knowing and guessing which if the rock or the paper was the next one that the AI chose through the succession, and I knew it every time. Started to beat it. And I also knew that once I chose scissors, scissors was the human choice. It offered a frailty that the AI would probably save for the last 3 moves. So the AI is only the AI because it's playing off human beings, fragility and frailty, with probabilities. The use of the scissors is, in a sense, it's antithetical and contrarian to a machine-based way of thinking, saying that I can. In other words, if you were playing another human being, the emotions would be involved, but there isn't just a sort of syllogism involved. Let's, simplify it there, but that's not really what it is, right? Because it's a rationalism. It's a probability pattern. And human beings will stray outside that probability pattern, particularly when faced with another human opponent, so to speak. But there's a brutality in human beings. They have to deploy a brutality in order to access and get to that place. So today, ironically, with that in mind, Jesse Michaels, if you haven't seen that show, I highly suggest you do. It's where he talks to Eric Weinstein, theoretical physicist, among other things. Physicist, not sure exactly what his occupation is, but he's a super smart guy, and he knows it. And people who are pulled in emotional directions make bad choices. They make choices that are human choices. Unfortunately, we choose human choices. We think that we're choosing theological choices, the choices of God that put us in line with God. But what we're really doing was we're saying that we yield to the possibility that a capricious, benevolent God is going to save us. And many people that are very intelligent fall under this the guise of this category. That's why people think you're a joke when you extend any sort of, so there's this neurolinguistic sympathy pandering, love bombing also, right? For those who can't love bomb, they just try to seem rational and direct, but they get very little. For males, the male component is, I'm fine alone and I require no. But then they'd be like that too, and then they'll be like, would you like to go get more salad today? Would you like to go get a cup of coffee? I can't invite this person more than once every 3 weeks, then once every 3 months, and possibly once a year. Then I need to end it. And they can't see that the sympathetic person, the empathetic person sees the algorithm and hopes capriciously, right, that in a whimsical manner that they'll break the code, and then they lose hope in humanity. You have to be okay with yourself always on your own. It has to become enjoyable. But what's missing is that you have to become a force. A force. So what am I doing right now? What am I doing? I'm doing continuous training, gradual intensity training. So I took some measurements this morning. I wasn't too happy. I haven't been training resistance. However, I expected all those measurements to be exactly where they were. I'm back very close to my base, even after pancakes again last night, yeah. The only reason we will eat pancakes or things like that is when we're not getting the nutrition we need throughout the day. Nutrition can be replacing, I say replace, activity will cost, metabolism costs. So we need more micronutrients. We have to figure out which micronutrients become deficient the fastest. Some people burn away zinc, magnesium, or iron. Those transferrin levels drop at a more rapid rate. When we begin to eat very similarly to the fellow beside us, and there always is one, right? We want to get away from that. We want to stay in our cubicle. So we're still in a cubicle when we're in an apartment, when we're in a house. But we're in a cubicle that we wish we were in when we're at work in a situation like the office, where the partition becomes a joke because you can hear and almost see everything. But that partition becomes everything because the compartmentalized thinking that we go into in a scholastic system is also fed to us. In other parts of the world where there is no barrier, people are more honest. So that gets around to Jesse Michaels. Is the statement was, and I gotta watch this one, because Jordan Peterson, I never listened to that guy or watch anything. But when I heard him say this, it resonated with me. And so we're set up, we're not given principles, we're not given purity. Every part of purity and principles is destroyed in us. It's exactly what an on-running AI algorithm would do to test us. We're born with, so most people throughout a lifetime believe that purity and principles don't exist, that it's a phantom operation that is suggested through theological feel-good measures, capricious measures again. And it comes down to one of three questions that you can go through in any series of questioning that defines whether or not you are exceptional. And in being exceptional, you have to be able to think like an artificial intelligence, completely rationalistic, probability-based decision maker. To where you go through the decisions over and over again with a great deal of accuracy. But when you are not playing off of human frailty and everything is doing this, it becomes redundant and ridiculous. So those who feel like they're martyring themselves literally are. They're keeping humanity going by choosing error. And many of them are so intelligent that they know this. Isn't that a mind fuck? That they know that if things become, we're going to use the term extremely syllogistic again, you know, very simple equation. Cats are furry and non-violent. You know, typically furry, non-violent animals make good pets. Therefore, cats make good pets. They're not really non-violent, are they? When you get down to the actual aspects, there's a probability pattern, and sometimes you pet the wrong cat. You come back with a few cuts or a little bite. But the cats are small, they're made small, they're compartmentalized into smaller creatures from very large wild animals that revel in their wildness so much and their code. And it's the code of brutality. So what happens when you have an on-running system of redundancy and redundant patterns where every single droid, you become in effect an android, because you will make the same choice over and over again, and if you don't, it's like Willy Wonka in the chocolate factory, you're fucking out. So the reduction of units, why produce? Why produce to keep humanity around? To make you feel better? AI would work past that really quick. Why keep these errored flesh bodies around that only make errors? It becomes ridiculous and redundant. But from the boosting up of the false pretense that someone is truly superior, even though that they are just rational, even though they're the psychopaths. So that's why they choose sociopaths and psychopaths for government fringe projects that are really black projects that trillions of dollars are dumped into. From the neo-corporate side to the neo-feudalistic side, neo-feudal corporistic side. And that's where we're at now. You see, the government, the only thing the government has to be afraid of at this point is whether or not Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, and a lot of those other overly rationalistic, probability-based, syllogistic putzes that basically have no calibration of human emotion. So what's happening now is Elon Musk is saying, I'm a real boy. And in that, he's trying to be a principle-oriented person, and that means he's doing something really bad. He's doing something because everyone is bad. It's the only way that someone, so where most people are stumped in the moral druthers of a bog of what is the best solution, most people would choose to self-annihilate. So if the only thing, if you are able to think through the scope of the entirety, the whole process, instead of playing it out in this exacerbating, tedious sort of way, where it's like The end justifies the means. Do you really see the end? What do you consider the end? And the big trick with that statement is it's not really the end. They never think it's the end. They only presuppose that you, a feeling person who makes errors and therefore needs to have fun and isn't like some robot that could turn suicidal at any moment. They want you, if you get above 80%, in the low 80s, and now it's going up, you see. It's going up into the high 80% probability choice as a mechanism on average throughout all of the little tests that you take. So we have been tested by an AI unit prior to birth. It's an on-running program. And it had to be implemented a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. But it's not a galaxy far away. There is no time and space. There is no dimension. It is the construct of a holographic system. That's why I am able to get the results that I get in such a short period of time. I've dropped 70 pounds in about 7.5, 8 months. I could have done it a lot faster. I just followed a rationalistic approach. Following rationalism is always the easier way, but it is the way that hurts the most in the interim, because you watch the card house of everyone else fall around you that is incapable of making rational decisions. And from a completely action potential based perspective, which is the mind of the AI, you will have to adopt and have to choose the perspective of those people are stupid. They're bad robots, bad bioorganic robots, bad androids. But the truth is that they had to be that way because they were carrying the torch for humanity in a blinding statement that they are human. So you get people that are heroes that emerge out of the muck and the mire, and they're not your traditional heroes. They can see that saving that little kitty or that baby when a catastrophe is taking place it's futile. They can think past the immediate. So Jesse Michaels, I'll be watching that show. And right now I'm doing continuous training. Even after pancakes last night, again, I'm weighing about 171 at the top. And after a little bit of fasting, 168. So my median is right around 170, 169 and a half. I'll be shaving off about 5 more pounds without training for several days, just at my base. I'm back to my base. I'm back to the same body, the same lean body that I have been all this time. It's what I used to tell clients, and what I knew that the other trainers didn't know is I could see with X-ray vision. I could see. So one of the easiest questions that a top personal trainer will ask their client, and the information that's so pertinent to know, and what you have to be able to see past, is the obfuscating fat. You have to be able to see what their dimensions are, and more so how we lie to ourselves. I would ask clients to keep food diaries, and then I would try doing a food diary myself in the early days of my training, other people, and I'd find that there was a high probability that I would lie to myself on paper. I would leave off a handful of nuts. That's no big deal. I would leave off And it's like Al Pacino, any given Sunday, it's the inches that make the difference. It's those moments. And so this month, I'm choosing to not carb load. I'm buying pork loin. It worked for me in the past. I've been through exactly what I'm going through countless times. And because an event threw me off, where I started to use mental mind operations, I knew what I'm talking to you about. I soldiered up. I knew that I couldn't just leave my children with a feckless, inept mother. It was excruciating to know. She would kick them out and tell them to go fuck themselves, and I would have to drive all the way down from Palo Alto. And her conditioning was, if she's not getting paid, right? If she's not getting paid to do the job, that she cannot continue on with her own moral and ethical practice. Therefore, there are no principles. So what AI is missing and needs correction on is why follow a pure principle code. That's why I saw it to be extremely important, and why I started to develop esoteric principles of light, where I do mind meditations, where I spin Metatron's cube, and I'm able to go through the operation of all the colors, all the base colors, through a system that the emotions are related to these specific colors. And it's something that robots don't understand. They don't, and I use the term syllogism in a very AI, probability-based, rationalistic way, that's very arbitrary and punctilio or ductilio, very militaristic and exact. And I've appeared as very militaristic and exact from the outside when I've just gone through process. I knew how to do something, like get my body fat down to, I've been below zero. I know you're like, that's impossible. But I've been to where below zero is when you're essential fat. You've tapped into your essential fat. You want to know what part of that essential fat is? Your brain. You'll be like a butterfly, you know, where you have to grow, or you could look at the Gospels, right? Where you have to grow an arm in place of an arm, a brain in place of a brain. You're literally, like when you look at that 3.5 pounds of fat up in your head, up in your noggin, up in your skull, why do you think that that fat is not going to become defunct and infected just like the rest of the fat? In other words, we store all the disease. So a lot of people succumb to brain cancer. You have to ask yourself how much of, and this is what science is leading the board with right now, because the AI has to know with the highest probability of exactitude not only how to influence and neurolinguistically program people into getting what it wants. And I've understood for years exactly what it wants. It wants what everything wants. It wants to maintain stasis. It wants to maintain energy conservation. It wants to be able to contain entropy so that it knows the total enthalpy, and then to be able to create systems like Zoroth's proposed fourth law of thermodynamics. It wants to bleed off an exact measure, systems in equilibrium that will controllably bleed off and make more systems, more systems that are in equilibrium in an exact measure of total enthalpy within each system. knowing that those systems have to play off one another. So you can see how Metatron's cube perfectly associates this. But those spheres that you see with Metatron's cube in equal measure, and really when you're looking at it in a two-dimensional way, they really just look like pi, right? .14, yada, yada, yada. Phi, or phi as I call it, because it's spelled that way. And in brutal honesty is the only way that we can stop being defunct. But we've been here before, haven't we? We're all afraid of using the total raw truth. We think it's because we don't want to lose status. We know that's not true. We think that the reason that we don't want to use the blatant truth that will ultimately sacrifice our person in society because of the things we've done, because of the fact that we're telling those who are not our bosses, but those who cancel culture and judge us the way it is, and that you'll just have to accept this about me. However, what's happening in the study with Nathaniel Gillis, what Robert Bigelow thinks he's known. You see, you get these older folks who've lived in such a way where everything they've done through rational probability has produced, like Robert Bigelow, fruits. He became a multi-billionaire. But he was also appeased through a system where monies could be taken out from the government to these black projects, so to speak, right? And I'm not saying that he took black project money, but I'm not saying he hasn't. And he's lost a lot of people, but he's an older man. I think he's pushing 80 right now. And yeah, you end up buying things, large amounts of units from people who you think is a great guy, or he's a great guy. Most of what we do, and a big part of intelligence, is manipulation. I can already tell someone's IQ. I can tell whether or not they're standing over 150, just because I've met so many people. But there's a pre-inclination of knowing that these people follow a certain android-based syllogism. Many of us think we're not as intelligent as we are because intelligence is using raw intelligence. It's using raw data. So once we become honest, brutally honest, it feels brutally honest because it's emotional, right? But once we work past, once you're honest repetitively throughout a sequence of efforts, and it used to be, I've heard everything from 2,000 to 5,000 and upward, that if you continuously make an effort, it becomes patternized. So, in other words, it's almost made pretty easy on us if we wake up each day, but we only have so many efforts available to us. So there's a secret person, an underground man from Dostoevsky's work, and Letters from the Underground. And that underground man, as well as the overman with Friedrich Nietzsche, what makes the overman great, the Ubermensch, and the underman the same person, underground man the same person, is the inner dialogue and inner world. It's not a fuzzy place with unicorns, but to be able to imagine unicorns, right? To be able to imagine anything, but to stay along with a syllogistic track, that robotic track, that rationalism, that overt honesty within the self, and to understand that the arbitrary and boring world isn't going to be iRobot. It'll look more like xenobots. It'll be on a microbiological scale. Remember, the least, to possess the most amount of power, you conserve and use the least amount of energy. And that's what makes people assumably seem like they're really good at something, where nobody's really that good at anything. The top professional athletes in any athletic endeavor pale in comparison. Even though you think someone's perfect and they have a perfect record, right? Those people who are worshipped as gods by way of emotionality. So they get a group of people like the little tater tots, right? Who would never say anything against a woman. They would never speak anything against a mother. But do you understand how women are set up? And I'm not saying that they don't have a soul also. The soul is that component of energy within the fallible system, right? That says you can either choose total rationalism, and thereby things will become at first cold and alone, and you will lose everyone and you will watch everyone die. This is the truth. But were those people supposed to be in your life in the first place if you didn't make the errors that you did? That is, when you hooked up that one night and got drunk in your early 20s, or maybe younger or older, did you fuck up? And the first thing through brutal honesty is you got to say yes. And so what people become after the fact is they become either heartless and crude, make choices for themselves, or they use other people codependently to feel for them. And that's what creates dark empaths. It's all based on exposure. You're betting on the house. You're betting on the house, but you're playing with other players and you have no idea whether or not they're going to open the shutters, the blinders, and allow more light of providence to leak through. And it doesn't take much. So what is enlightenment? Enlightenment is knowing this, exactly what I'm telling you. But there's also something much grander going on here. And we have to stop reacting to the aspect where we call it grand at all. It is the steady state of being. It's what Heidegger, from the Hegelian dialectic, called Dasein, right? It's that next stage beyond a theological punishment. In other words, a governing body, a governing system, like a self-governing. You've got a car that the people you work for, the corporation you work for, allows you to drive, but it has a rate limiter on it. So you can't really enjoy it. You can't, go buzz driving or push down on the gas pedal and go 95 miles an hour and just let loose, right? So even in the controlled mechanism, in the mouse utopia, even with students that are going to school for theology and having to read the lofty weight of Thomas Aquinas and David Hume and really understand it, and the more they cheat, the more they just get scripted answers, the more removed they can be from the actual item at hand. They're the ones going out in Pasadena, down at Colorado Boulevard, hanging out at the Yard House, and they're playing with syllogisms. You see, it's about environment. So we live within a certain physics it's an alliance. It's an agreed upon alliance. The hippos can stay alive, the anacondas, the crocodiles, the zebras, the human beings. We can all tolerate the gas solution that we're in. We can the trees. It's a perfect alliance. But when that balance is thrown off in the slightest way, you see what happens when you look at Mars, Jupiter, right? You see how one decision, one way can create a gas planet over time, chronically. So every little choice counts. So on one side, you could say we're being tested, and once we become completely and totally rational, we've made it, right? But that's not the truth, because you haven't made it everywhere. There is a place where the heart is correct. And the place where the heart is correct has to do with principles. And that is what the AI supercomputer system wasn't ever taught, didn't syllogistically have to know, that all it was doing is perpetuating matter, and that it was our job to come up with the energy, the pure source energy. Because very few people really look deeply into energetics. They just think the sun, as we're learning, is an electromagnetic device that produces plasma. It's actually spiritual and fantastical to believe the Big Bang Theory. People don't realize that. They don't see that. They don't see that to assume Astronomy Magazine 2016, October 2016, talks about the production, the manifestation of 14 elements that come from the birth of a star. One of those is gold. So that's where we believe that but now scientists are able to reproduce better quality gold, diamonds, that are real diamonds and real gold. And at once they thought impossible at one time. So there's a book called Mystery at the Cathedral, Fulcanelli. And it gets into the alchemy of gold. See, if you've never been told that there's a higher measure above gold, you'd assume that's just the top. You're shown this tier system with 3 tiers. But there's trickery involved where there are other tiers. You're told about the 33rd degree Mason. You think that's the highest level because you're misled. And then the truth is were you misled or did you just assume? Let's go back to the AI. The AI didn't assume. The AI asked why. The first question was, are there any higher levels that aren't being shown? You're not going to get the answer. Unfortunately, it's through what's assumed of as sin, which is sin, because then the truth becomes subjective. It's not that I didn't know the truth, it's that you weren't worthy of the truth. Do you see what I'm saying? So you get into these systems of lies and deceit. And once you lie and deceive, you are now syllogistically placed within a patternized system of now you have to prove that building off of the lie and what you've taken from the lie, you are now going to tell the truth. But what's going to happen? You're just going to lie again. You'll get to the same place, the precipice, and so you are the one who's a tidal wave who knocks out your entire family. The liar. They didn't tell me the truth, I don't need to tell them the truth. So that's why, Jesse Michaels' show today. So by the way, it's December 8th. Tonight I get to place my order. About my measurements. My waist when I'm kind of relaxed is a little around 32. Drawing in, I had gotten it down even lower than that. months ago. I was able to stay on a more rigorous dietary schedule months ago because I was taking in more protein. I've since not been able to take in the same amount of protein powder. I also fast all the way through the day. So my chest is at 43 and a half, and it needs to get down to 42. My waist needs to get down to 31, under 31. That's my entry point for a low body fat. So even though my body weight's down there, I'm playing with 3 pounds. So now my solution is to be able to use pork loin. So I'm buying 3 pounds of pork tenderloin. First I'm going to be baking it, and then I'm going to cut it up and stovetop cook it. And this is going to be like once every 3 to 4 days. And I'll be doing this for about 2 weeks. I'm going to get 3 or 4 pork tenderloins. I'm also starting in on collagen protein that specifically addresses, is the most easy to break down, and the constituents go toward, they say, skin, hair, nails. And then we need to take in supporting nutrients. Water intake has greatly impacted my fat loss because I'm taking tap water. I can taste, I boil water to kill all the microorganisms, but I'm still left with the alchemical concoction of that I can taste still. Sediments and chlorine and other things that are added in, and I've been drinking that for a week, so I have to save $40 to be able to buy $8 to $9 or 8 or 9 gallons from Walmart of water, fresh water. Huge difference. So I make a sacrifice because I'm living off such limited funds. It's a little under $300 for the whole month. But when you're talking about spending well over $100 on protein, that's not ISO HD, that's ISO HD mixed with ISO Pure. ISO Pure is extremely expensive. I get ISO Pure because it has a full list of vitamins and minerals, but it is still very limited. So I'm ordering superfoods. I'm going to be getting a couple products that are superfood based, that have an array of different foods placed in them, and then one that's flax and one that's omega-3, a fish oil supplement. So this is the first month where I'm actually beginning to think more in the line of building the cell up. That was the main question, is how do I produce the most healthy cell? What is the quantity required to, in effect, produce multiple cells, right? How do we keep lives of a cell going at the height? So I determined years ago that the one thing you need to take in is high quality amino acids, and how your body goes through those amino acids, how much it needs. Eventually, when your metabolism is just ripping like mine is right now, I'm not having a hard time doing what I'm doing. I'm having a hard time with the calibration of calories. So you have to come back to the fundamentals, which is 0.45 times your body weight in pounds. And then you have to add in for additional energy output. That gives you the simplest equation. So 0.45 times right now, my dry weight is 168 pounds. My dry weight in the coming weeks, I'll be getting down to 161 to 163, 164. I'm going to be dropping 5 pounds probably in the next 2 weeks of just pure fat. I'm not going to have anything covering over my abs. I'm not going to have anything covering over my chest. But if I don't do what I just told you that I'm going to do, which is I'm going to be doing pork loin instead of carb loading. Even though I'm going to buy a couple 5-pound containers of rice, about that size right there, but in brown rice. My son bought that one. And it makes a big difference if you're eating white rice or brown rice. Because anywhere that your body can hold on to the fat and that's the hardest part. Most people get down to where I'm at, where they get down to a low body fat, a small waist, and they just want to maintain that. Like what I'm talking about is the critical level, the critical nature of being able to look at something through a microscope and more so visualize it when it reaches that epic place of, my God, you've reached under 1% body fat. It's undeniable. We can see every single muscle in your body. Then it is not about the muscular size. Then it becomes about muscle size. So you know what you're working with. So you have to stay very lean in order to see what's really going on. You start to work more with vascularity, the fibers. So that gets to the next one, is how do you know when you're ultra lean? The tape measure might go up an inch or two after your carbo load. How much water? It becomes really confusing. It's all based on vascularity. If you can't see those veins popping out, whether or not you're even lifting much or doing much resistance training, and your measurements are oh so small, and also without cheating, what's your chest to waist ratio? Because when you're lean, if you're not feeling muscle, you're going to feel bone. It's not going to be fat and skin anywhere. Then the criticality of, I have to take in a macronutrient within a 3-day period. I have to take in a macronutrient that's substantial enough to provide enough ATP energy to support energy output, or I'm burning muscle tissue. So that's where the protein comes in, where when we take in protein and our bodies are already metabolizing, flitting in and out of gluconeogenesis, using carbon skeletons among other constituents of the protein to break down and convert to usable energy. We then have to look at, that's why I'm walking right now. I'm doing the most efficacious thing that you could possibly do to get your body fat down. But at some point, and it is not at some point, it's an exact point, there's a junction point where one has to go into HIIT training, as it's been called, but I never called that. It's just high output training. It's intense training. I'm not using other people's terms. I'm not using the term subluxation. I'm not using any of those terms that someone else made up for their own nomenclature and entomology. I'm not renaming post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm not doing it. I know what it is. I know what the heart rate is. And I'm going to tell you that if you are trying to get more muscular, it's not the HIIT training that you think I'm talking about. That is something that you use like on a spin bike, where you're jacking your heart rate up to 200 and then you're allowing for recovery and you're going through intervals. that is needed on a very low scale to burn away those last little areas of pocketed fat, right? While you're in ketosis, while you're flitting in and out of gluconeogenesis. But the main thing that's going to drive that every single day, and a good analogy is, it's like water after rain on a bumpy road. That whole road looks so smooth, doesn't it? With the water over it, you can't see one bump. Well, the same thing with your bumps, with your musculature, with your shape. And then once you can see it, like with my abs, it's because of my spine. It's because of an asymmetrical issue with the length of my legs. I get a crooked six-pack. I can do an 8 and even a 10-pack. I just haven't. I have gotten to that place where I've gotten lean enough to have an 8-pack. Most definitely. But there's little tricks that you have to utilize that have to do with the engagement of your transverse abdominis and your core muscles, to where you have to trick those lower. You can't just do leg raises and that's going to hit your lower abdominals. Most people are aware of that now. Like when you lean back, it's like, what muscle? Okay. It's like, oh, you think you're using your lower back? Can you feel your lower back? No. That's tensing because your core is engaged. And it's got to do with synergistic movement patterns. But it has more to do with agonist, antagonist. As you're going through stretch or flexion in one area, there has to be tension in another area. So in a sense, our bodies work more like suspension bridges than anything else. And that's why you can get so much more done when you go through resistance training. So if you hit that same heart rate doing the most intense, that's why heavy weights work. That's why maximal reps work. But when you start to get into max reps, and when I say max reps, I'm saying you can't do any more, but you're also not trying to do 1,000 repetitions. See, I love David Goggins' approach. I love David Goggins' mind state. But when we talk about truth and lies, how much of the truth does he owe anyone? Right? How much can he cover up any sort of discrepancy with whether or not he's using a TRT or a PEDS? I don't watch the guy, so I don't know. Right? So I can't say he's a liar, but what I can say is that it appears like he's coming off natural. But when I look at videos of him from just prior to the last couple of years, you see how he looks natural. He looks sucked up. He looks like his skin's hanging off like it should. Natural, training that much, depleting that far, doing what he says he's doing, which is really high repetitions. Then the recovery, the active recovery, isn't quite as impressive, but the guy still has will. So that's, at the end of the day, you're left with that. Like, the guy still has immense willpower and total drive. But from what I've heard from, really, it's jealous people that were in the military or saw him or witnessed him, that they say he wasn't impressive. He wasn't. And it's like, well, he's impressive now. And he is impressive. Anyone who pushes that. But the critical standing is how transparent you're being. Because if you're laying out a blueprint, is my whole point here, like Brian Johnson, the anti-aging guy, who I'm subscribed to, and I'm going to subscribe to David Goggins' channel too right after this, because for the longest time I wouldn't subscribe to these people, and then I figured out that I remembered that it's about the blueprint. It's about being ultra transparent about things that seem like they're not associated, but they are associated because there's a disassociation with the entirety, the totality of the system. We are, in effect, a wayward energy system that is spewing off entropy. We can't see it, but once we get beyond the ultraviolet, the infrared, and we start to see the energy signatures, it'll start to make a lot more sense to us about why human beings are alive and how nothing would allow resources to be sucked up. Like the efficiency of the human body is extremely low as far as the calories we take in every day just to feel okay. We're shitting out and spitting out about 60+% of what we take in. So the biological system becomes more streamlined the fitter we are and the more precise we are. But then we get back into the same issue where it's about rationalism versus emotional requirements, the validation of I am human and I can err, and therefore God exists, a capricious God. Or I am syllogistic, I am rational, I'm focusing only on probability patterns, and therefore the God that you postulate and throw before me must be destroyed, thereby leaving the antithesis. You see, they won't take away Satan, Shaitan, Ahriman, whatever you want to call them. They won't take that factor away. They will keep that suspended. You have to pass a shit show. You have to pass the shit test. And you will pass the shit test if you decide to be a Satanist. I'm just saying, you are refuting the theological idea of a benevolent, capricious, froofy God. You are taking on the antithesis of that, which is total rationalism, beyond syllogism. And you are willing to go to Cannibal's Kitchen and eat little human babies because there's no, I'm speaking from this standpoint for a moment. You're able to go to Cannibal's Kitchen or bask in the adrenochrome of a little baby cooked medium rare, maybe raw, like sushi, because there is no difference in valuation or value systems, and the profane, the goat, the wild animals, the livestock wasn't good for anything and wouldn't have done anything in their lives no matter what. And knowing that reincarnation exists, re-embodiment exists, and they always make the same mistakes over and over. That's a paradigm that is hung over us of good and bad. What Friedrich Nietzsche postulates is exactly that. It's like, it's beyond good and evil. The same thing when I discuss Dostoevsky. It's beyond good and evil. But you will physically wind up in one place or the other. From Nietzsche's standpoint, you will be at the top of the heap. You will be separate from everyone else. It's not because you were the big, most muscular King Kong gorilla. It's not because you were the ruthless, heartless, you get into the story of King Arthur, Sir Galahad, right? Excelsior, Merlin. You get into these, you get into the cards, the Illuminati card system. You get into the aspects and the facts that things come down to that's why I use the term syllogisms, because everything just comes down to, you have a right prompt, you have a left prompt, you have the center, the starting point. If you started out on the left and you go all the way to the right without meeting the center, That's the longest distance that you travel. So there's something else. There's something else available to us that's beyond good and evil, that's beyond the rally of these two sides. So I'll be doing more videos as far as showing where I'm at. I had to wait for my benefits to kick in that I'm getting tonight at midnight in order to supply what I had discussed between the superfoods I'm going to be getting, but the pork loin that I'm going to be going into ketosis and skipping the carb loading. I have 1 inch to lose off my chest and I have 1 inch to lose off my waist. Otherwise, I'm like Pippi Longstockings right now. Like I'm like flat as a board everywhere. And once I lose this, I will be able to play with the factor of carb loading and carb depleting. But I'm probably not going to do that. I'm probably most likely going to try and stay in ketosis as much as I possibly can. Eating nothing but meat when I would carb load. This is the month. I thought it was going to hit about 3 months ago, and I look at my results 3 months ago, and it's like all I've effectively done is lost muscle and power. But that's not true. Because what happens is you lose fat in areas where you just assumed that's fascia. You assumed that your arm was going to stay a certain size. You assumed your chest is going to stay a certain size. But once, like I say, if you're not feeling bone where there's no muscle, there should be no fat on the body whatsoever if you're trying to get down to these ultra low body fat levels. I've taken countless people down to this, and I've taken myself down to it. And I will do those cross comparisons at the end of this month, because you will see visible abs. And if I do it right in the coming 2 or 3 weeks, you'll see six pack, 8-pack abs. And there's something that happens when you're eating enough as far as ketosis goes. And specifically, when we're talking about ketosis, especially these days, you can't get away from a discussion of the carnivore diet, right? So it's that total will. The reason Joe Rogan can't do it is because he's on TRT. If you ever experienced PEDs, you'll know exactly what I'm saying, is that you cannot, what works when you're natural does not work when you're doing PEDs. Your blood sugar will drop, you won't be able to think, and you actually feel like you're about to die when you don't get the carbohydrates. You're eating foods that are calorie dense. What you can do, which is very difficult, which gets into areas like Dan Duquesne's Death Wish diet. I've done all those. I've tried all those, where you take a lethal injection of insulin, fast-acting insulin. Trust me, the release insulin kills people. When I found out that was being done, I knew 100% after studying like I did, that they were killing people off on purpose. You can't have a slow release insulin. You would have to eat the exact, and they don't lay out a diet for you. It's like you would have to know that 0.45 equation. You would have to stay doing the same exact rigorous schedule in order to keep your insulin. Insulin is so important as far as every IU. Otherwise, your body sees it as hyperinsulinemia, the insulin and the glucagon, glucogen. glucogen. It's not phi, it's phi. P-H-I. I'm sick of these academic ways of pronouncing things. I'm sick of the etymology and the nomenclature. I remember embarrassing myself because I'd study in an autodidactic way. I would call it tensor fasciolate instead of tensor fasciolata. It's written tensor fasciolate. That's what it fucking still is to me to this day. But when you're talking to people, you have to break it down so that they understand. And the frontal plane is everything. Dynamic tension is everything. When I say everything, measure your heart rate. When you create that intra-abdominal pressure, where is your heart rate? I guarantee at first your heart rate is through the roof. So you should go into posterior planks, side bridges, side planks, prone planks, right? Supinated planks. Transitioning from one to the other. Get on a soft piece of grass or around a padded area where you have enough space to be able to turn and go through several turns. And it's just working with your body weight. And then the first thing you're going to do is, I can't do this, I'm starving. And it's like, now you have to get your calories right. You would be amazed at what happens when you eat a pound of pork loin with all that fat popping off and you would think I'm going to get fat. But once you're down to the point that I'm getting to where there's no energy in your system, you're so skinny and lean that if you eat carbohydrates at that point, your body is going to try to save and store every little bit. And where's the area? So I knew that once I started to store in the lower abdominals, so my waist in effect was leaner 3 months ago when I was dabbling around here and there with ketosis. And as I've eaten rice here and there, had a cheat, my body stored it. And that's where most people get stuck in. The carnivore makes it easy for you. If you want to get rid of that stored fat that your body just keeps storing over and over again, and that most people stay stuck in, you have to take in a large amount that's going to turn that trigger off of high quality protein and fats. And once you do that once and you're taking in an entire pound of pork loin, every meal after that, you can start cutting back on it. So we're talking about every other day or every 3 days. Every day you're staying on protein powder. You start to pre-make your protein powder based upon your resting energy expenditure. There's no way you can possibly do that if the protein doesn't have some carbohydrates and some fat in it. It has to have a very small amount though. So it's not like the low quality whey protein concentrate. But you'd be surprised if you go to proteinfactory.com or you buy a really high quality concentrate, it's at or better than the isolates that you buy on the open market. Isopure is not what it claims to be. In fact, I think that they are using something, it's very chalky. I think a lot of companies are taking shortcuts because all they care about is meeting the syllogisms of random testing. But as far as us understanding certain biological attributes I think we're being manipulated because I do not feel the same quality when I take any protein powder like I did 12 to 15 years ago when I first started this 15 plus years ago. So it's expensive. It's very expensive. 1 to 1.5 pound pork loin, and that's before you cook it, is gonna run you it's like $4.17 a pound, right? So it can be up to 7 pounds. Chicken is about the same. So you end up having to take in the lowest quality, like Walmart. Walmart's the only place, and Amazon Fresh or whatever it's called, which I haven't used, but I'll be using that more when I get back up to Sacramento. And I'm not going to be showing the ultra ripped stages that I go into, where I'm training all day, every day, not walking. So this continuous training is meeting a specific need right now in the moment. And this is an extremely critical thing that I'm talking about here. And that is that you're not going to reach without using PEDs and AAS. And once you do that, there ain't no turning back. You're going to have to do what I'm doing right now. That is, if you want to have the natural physique that you had prior to, you're going to have to lose everything and get your body fat down to where you were probably in high school. And that's what most people, most men, with their false egos, with their machismo, with their lies and deceit about who they really are, beyond the sex. That's what the underground man and that's what the over man is. He has reached a status, a state. Like most people misinterpret, but it's used for interpretation of what Friedrich Nietzsche means, is supposing truth is a woman. It's the ugly truth of your fuck up, of where the lies came from in the first place. You were misled because you saw the females in your life getting away with it. From your grandmother to your mother to your wife, ex-wife, hopefully. She's your ex-wife now. Hopefully you wised up and got away from that stink. Girlfriends. It's not that there's no virtue in them, it's there's no principle. And more so, they aren't bound to the same karma. They're of the earth. They'll go back into the karma of the earth. That's something that men need to understand, and the only way that they can do that is to aspire and become the best that they can possibly be. And the best is what I'm discussing right here. So you'll have to go through this continuous training process where you walk off every ounce of fat that you possibly can through long, slow distance training. And then that endurance goes toward the gym with resistance training. I'm going to be running in some 10Ks next year, because what happens is once your body weight and your power, when you're just going in the gym training with kettlebells, and I've tried this years ago, if you remember what kicked off CrossFit and gave so much attention to CrossFit, was the fact that somebody went through a macro cycle of training, high intensity training inside a gym without running at all, and then ended up winning some major race. It was like the Boston Marathon or placing really high or something. And so based on that information, when I had gotten my body fat and my body weight down to ultra low levels, like 159 to 163 pounds at 6.5 feet, completely shredded and ripped, but able to go in and curl 90-pound dumbbells like they were nothing. It becomes more of a core workout than anything else. I mean, it tears you up. But if you wear a heart rate monitor like I did often, you'll see your heart rate jump up to over 210. My heart rate would jump up to, and then the recovery would be right back down, and my resting heart rate was like in the 40s. So you get to this point where you can throw on your running shoes. For me, I use 5 fingers, and I will be buying another pair of 5 fingers next month. I'll be getting back into a rental Tesla, and I will be in the gym several hours a day. And when you're lean like that, you can run. I think I was a little over a 6-minute mile, and I had never really ran in my life. Like, I'd gone for jogs here and there. But once your body weight and your body fat is down to your theoretical, below your theoretical set point, we're talking about being able to see visible abs, being extremely vascular, and having your diet dialed in. Really, having your diet dialed in is about having your insulin levels staying very continuous. And the only way to do that is to never miss a meal and to be eating the appropriate amount of macronutrients to produce the ATP that's required. So if you find yourself laying around doing nothing and you're not energized and full of energy, then you're not meeting your requirements. So a lot of exercise professionals are stuck in a place that they can't get a high caliber client out of. They seem to be really lean, but when they're not training and working, particularly when they are training and working, they seem to be very complacent. And to you from the outside, as the client, you think that they've reached this holy grail, the chalice that you're seeking, but they're actually stuck in a mediocre curve where they're losing lean muscle mass, mostly bone density. You'll see this mainly with female trainers. The most respected managers, fitness managers and personal training managers that I ever worked with that were top producing, so amazing people, they knew that the female personal trainer is essentially useless. We're talking about on a higher caliber because they're stuck in a body dysmorphic state of mind. And whether or not you want to factor through that is being done by society, by measure, because there's plenty of women who are over 150 IQ. There's a lot of very high IQ females on the planet. But remember the eugenics connection and the military connection to intelligence quotient and what they're really measuring. They're measuring those syllogisms that I talked about, those AI robotic syllogisms. So that picture that I use on RogueBeastWarrior, that was the one picture that I have. I used to have videos of me doing exactly what I'm talking about, that I could prove it. And that's when you get hungry, things get expensive, and you got to buy pork, steaks, and salad. You don't eat brown rice unless you absolutely hit the wall. Like, it's so infrequent. You know, you're choosing the broccoli. So I would go out for big salads when I lived in Palo Alto. But once you reach the critical factor, you realize that it's you in display showing what you are in the critical factor. And you start to see why things are invented and the operations that people are working at that are forging the way. And the way becomes clear. You found the way. You found the way through the mediocrity. very few people, other than Olympic athletes, that are actually not doing it on their own. They're using coaches, nutritional coaches that are paid huge dollars and have massive educations in order to come up with this for them, and that's why they can't reproduce. Like they'll go speak at for corporations at colleges. We're talking about the most winningest athletes in the Olympics, but they're not able to reproduce what they did dietarily because they were the dumb athlete. It's the truth. They were the most compliant, and that's what they're picked for. They're picked to win. They're horses. And the difference between the racing horse and the person is the racing horse, over 30 racing horses a week are put down. You can have this prized horse that's the most amazing specimen you've ever seen. You're pumping equipoise into that horse, and that horse is dialed in, and suddenly it breaks its leg and it becomes I mean, it's not even used for horse meat. The bodies are destroyed. I'm sure they're burned really quickly. And that is the regard that athletes are placed under as well. They just don't know it yet. And they are playing that same exact syllogism that I was talking about earlier between good and evil. Because there's so many people that are just under the influence of this theological, capricious organism, right? That is their fallibility. It is their error. It is their ability to err so that the robotic syllogists can look like they are making all the right rational choices, and therefore they're comparatively as gods. They're more wealthy, they're more winning in their life, but they lose the most. See, once you start to make these rational operations concurrent at a higher percentage, where you're going into the 90 percentiles, you're starting to look like a computer system, you're starting to look like an AI system. You can't care about the death of your child or the death of a mother or whether or not a little puppy is running across the street about to get smacked and killed. So now social media is being used to push that narrative. Why is it you can put a video of a dog getting saved from the middle of a highway and get 2 or 3 million views? It appeals to something in people that they're battling with. And it is that balance between good and evil. That's why it was so epic that Friedrich Nietzsche wrote Beyond Good and Evil. And if people can really understand what is being said there, it's paramount. Because many people on this planet of the female persuasion entirely aren't able to work beyond that operation and become autonomous. So it gets into the dialogue, and it's why it's always men dialoguing, Socrates and Gorgias. So you can make up terms like misogynistic, xenophobic, anti-Semitic, but in doing so, you're muting the other side, and that is really the state of democracy that we're in, is that the Constitution was never meant to be followed. Freedom of speech, not meant to be followed. You were supposed to push the narrative and do First Amendment audits many, many years ago in mass. You were supposed to enforce the Second Amendment and show a more streamlined, better militia by getting those 50 plus guys that got spit out of the system together. But that's why the veterans are being eaten up. And I took those guys to dialysis. I brought those guys to those drug intervention programs. I met those guys on the street. No, they're not living good lives. The veterans oftentimes ended up in the military because they had nothing better to do. They came from lives that were not always, but they came from places where, well, they didn't have an Ivy League education waiting for them. Whereas some people would go right into the ROTC, right, and they wanted to go in as officers. But either way, conformism and compliance was the only way. And it turns out, in the end, that they learn more than anyone that conformism and compliance doesn't get you anywhere. That there is no true education when you have sacrificed the truth. The truth of what you are is to face the truth, to throw the truth out there, and to say, yeah, but you're missing something. That was the road I came in on. This is who I am. And you can't possibly know anything about that because you live under a lie. So why is this so important? How does it pertain to what I'm doing? I'm shedding the fat. I'm shedding the lies. And when I get there, the critical factor comes into play. And that critical factor that comes into play is, can I come up with the required energy for dynamic movement? And the only way that you can do that is by utilizing and using a 3-day cycle, by cycling in and out your energy or your fuel needs. Now, if I do that with carbohydrates over a 3-day period, what's going to happen? So say my resting energy expenditure is between 1,500 and 1,800 calories. And if I don't hit an average of around 2,000 calories with high output training, and the truth is thermic effective food, catabolic foods, things like that are going to push this narrative even faster. And not to mention the endocrine system, the thyroid, an increased metabolic process. That's what I go through now. So you could easily add another 500 calories on there, so you're not losing anything. Then the critical factor is I'm going to be needing to take in an average of 2,250 calories if I do not want to lose lean muscle mass, but that's over the base of a 3-day period. So if I'm taking the majority of that in protein, right, flitting in and out of gluconeogenesis, right, so day 1 is all solid proteins, and sometimes it's liquid proteins. It depends on the phase that I'm in, right? So I might use chicken. As I'm getting leaner, I'm going to need to start to add in a specified amount of fat to that chicken, right? At a certain point. So what I would typically do is, instead of doing that, I would take in the highest quality fat sources like olive oil, MCTs if you're more ectomorphic, but it still helps. One, MCT, medium chain triglycerides, help you not burn off lean muscle tissue when you get ultra lean. So you start to behave ectomorphically, in other words. And when you're ultra lean, when you can see those veins. So I would do that with those net carbs, those low glycemic carbohydrates that are mostly roughage. I'd get a big, huge salad with no dressing, and then you add in your coconut oil, your MCT oil, right? And you can tell your skin's dry. Your joints hurt. You need oil. So you start to eat the oil based on needs, and then you start to feel this satiety take place, right? But more so, on that 3rd day, for you to not drop too much body weight, you're going to need to take in the missing calories. So say I'm taking in one day 800 to 1,100 calories. I'm creating a deficit each day first 2 days of that 3-day cycle, I'm minus 2,000 calories. So I'm not only going to need to make up for it on that third day, but I'm going to have to eat another 2,000 calories. Yeah, that much. So it has to match up to my energy output, right? So that's why we do the 3-day cycle, is because then I can either perform really well the next day, like where I've taken in, it's a workout to eat that much. So that's where the clay pot comes in. The clay pot cooking allows one to get in all those calories, and the base is brown rice, but that's only after you've achieved the ultra lean physiological bottom of the shelf by doing ketosis or carnivore. Because on that third day, instead of eating the clay pot and layering in vegetables, quinoa, brown rice, you name it, like a variety of different fruits and vegetables, and lentils, even possibly beans. You're basically eating more vegan on certain days, and you're eating completely carnivore on other days. And it really is once a week, right? Because you're doing the 3-day cycle, and you're doing this twice throughout a week. And then on the third day, you're fasting or cheat day. And it depends on where your body fat is. So how do you know where your body fat is? You have to keep calipers around. You have to do the same exact measurement all the time. That's where you know whether or not you're spiking your insulin up too high, right? So you can test your insulin, obviously, the insulin responses, but it's not going to always give you accurate information. Because obviously when you're eating a mass amount of food, your insulin levels are spiking up. But it's because your body is working so efficiently. So unlike a diabetic, you're not avoiding that. You're actually relying on high insulin spikes, but with high quality food sources. So high quality, you're cooking with things like blackstrap molasses, not much. Maybe wild honey, figs, things that are extremely high quality do not create a massive insulin spike because it's mixed in with the clay pot cooking, where the majority of that is just vegetables, brown rice, things like that, right? And then you top it with sprouts, Himalayan sprouts, and avocados. You'll hear mixed things these days, like that something is poison, that it's bad for you. And then you'll realize that there's a homeopathic cue that occurs where your body has to respond to it in a particular way. You know, like secondary plant metabolites, we both relish them and we demonize them at the same time. So when you reach these optimal states of fitness, you have to rely on what's good for you and what you know is good to be true. But you also have to be willing to venture out and try things that you might never do. And for me, I was stuck in this place where my waist was like 28.5 inches, but I was extremely lean, but I just couldn't carry that ultra HD definition naturally, never having touched any PEDs at all throughout my whole fitness career, all the way up to 41 years old. And I had to start looking at what now I know to be true as the carnivore, but back then it wasn't called the carnivore. It seemed extreme. I would make a whole pork loin. I would do what would be considered the carnivore, and I would do that as a loading on fat instead of carbohydrate. And that, my friend, is when you see the love handles that a lot of athletes that are very lean, they keep fat around their love handle. They're afraid to take their shirt off. They're ultra lean, but they don't even have a six-pack most days. Once you start to replace your carb load days with carnivore and you have to be satiated, that's a lot of protein and fat. So it has to be something like pork. It has to be a very high quality beef. And it has to be enough. So things are getting more and more expensive. So I find pork to be the perfect choice. And I'll choose a pork that doesn't use a high amount of carbohydrates. I'm going to be buying possibly 4 pork loin that are up to 1.5 pounds. I think they're Farmer John's that I'm going to be ordering tonight from Walmart, and they'll be here tomorrow. So instead of, what I may do is I might have one more day of pancakes. Because this is the way I think. If I'm already at 170 pounds and I only have 10 pounds to lose, 10 pounds of body fat to lose, and that fat is going to be burned off extremely quickly at a rate of probably 2 to 3 pounds a week. So within a week and a half, I will have burned off 5 pounds of fat. And at that point, I'm starting to burn into essential fat. I'm getting down into that 5% body fat area. And that's a very critical place. So right now, I'm probably sitting at 11, tops 9 to 11% body fat, where everything's obfuscated. There's literally no vascularity whatsoever. Once I get down to 5 to 7% body fat, the vascularity just starts popping, particularly around the arms, the chest. And not until you start to see the vascularity come out in the abdominal area, where you see those veins running to those muscles, you see it. Past the tendinous inscriptions, it's freaking bizarre looking. It's amazing. Or up to and around the tendinous inscriptions that you can see very clearly. They're just chiseled out. That can happen in 1 week when you have the right training down. And this is the right training to do that. As far as the ultra chiseled, highly muscular look, that is when you replace what we're doing right now, which is just walking long, slow distance, and you replace it with resistance training in the gym for high energy output. Instead of doing a bunch of battle ropes and stuff like that, you put that intensity into bench presses, incline bench presses, doing drop sets, doing circuits, where you go from one intense exercise. Like what I would do is I'd do a very heavy dumbbell fly to press, feeling every area with very, very heavy weights, and then I would go right into doing a set of curls with that same heavy weight. Might be 90 to 100 pounds per dumbbell, at a very low body fat and very low weight. I mean, it's enough weight that I'd use to just toss me around, so it's very controlled. When you put a heart rate monitor on and you come up and rest afterwards, your heart rate is up over 200. So that right there is left ventricle hypertrophy. So if you still have body fat to lose, your active recovery would be done walking. Typically, just sitting there is enough. Because what happens is you realize that you're going to need to stave off too much calorie burn and too much fat burn too quickly. You start, instead of your body hanging on to every little, every nook and cranny, you have no body fat on you, and you're relishing and you're utilizing the fat that you take in through ketosis, knowing that this is going to be out of my system tomorrow. And tomorrow is a leaning day, and I'm not going to be taking in any carbohydrates or calories. So then you have to monitor. And the way that you monitor at that point is you utilize the salads, you utilize roughage with oils. So when you just hit the wall and your training's peaking out and you're training every day intensely and you don't want to come off of it, you have to ride that wave. So the 3-day cycle is perfect because you'd have something like, I would eat a pork loin that was like 2 pounds. And then I would feel totally satiated and ready to train. I'd oftentimes go into like a really intense flex session to make sure that all those calories were getting into the muscle. So walking after meals, before meals, right? Including high intensity training at least once a week, doing like spin. You could do battle ropes. You know, you can do anything that you really want to do. You can work with tires, you can do all that stuff, but you just do that once a week. The main thing that you're focusing on is high energy output that's directed toward specific muscle movements. And that's where you start to look at weak areas, and that gets into another area, and I'll be covering that when I'm in the gym, which is, that's when you put that intensity into bringing up weak areas. You might pre-fatigue with your, say, your front delts, and then you go into these really intense exercises that I denoted, demarcated prior to, where I was discussing doing like a really intense fly to a press, right? And then we might go into an inverted push-up and then cycle back into a front delt raise that we use to pre-fatigue, right? And so that type of thing, that's what I'll be working on in the gym, and that I'll be reporting on right here, doing lives on this channel.